Hello maths fans, today we're going to be changing the subject of a formula. This is also known as rearranging equations. Okay, we're playing with algebra today. Let's have a look at a formula here, or an equation. It's got an equals in, it's an equation or a formula. So here is a formula to find v if we know u and a and t. It tells us that v is equal to u plus a times t. So that means that v is the subject, okay? When we talk about what is the subject of a formula, it's the letter on its own on one side of the equals, okay? So when you've got a single letter on one side on its own, that means it's the subject of a formula. And that's great if we know values for u and a and t, because we could just substitute them in. U is equal to 10, a is 2, t is minus 3. We can put those values into this formula, and we know that v is equal to 10 plus 2 times minus 3, and we can tidy that up and say v is equal to 10, add negative 6, and that means v is equal to 4. So that's fantastic if we want to find v. But let's say we want to find a. If we want to find a and we've got values for v and u and t, what would we do? Well, we would take those numbers for v and u and t, substitute them into this formula, and we can get the answer still. v is 3, u is 7, and t is 2, which means that we get 3 equals 7 plus 2 times a. And then if I take away the 7 here, I get negative 4 equals 2a, and then I divide by 2, and I get minus 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. So we can do that, but it's a little bit fiddly. And in fact, if we follow through what we've just done there, if we look at that initial formula, in order to find a, what we did first was we took away the 7. We took away u from both sides. So I take away 7 here, or take away 7 here, take away 7 here, do the same to both sides, and I get v minus u equals at. And then the last thing I did was I divided by 2. And when I divided by 2, that is the t value. So in effect, what I was doing was I was taking our value for v, subtracting u, then dividing by t. So this formula here is how we calculate a. And what we can say is that a is now the subject of this formula. And that makes it slightly easier to calculate a. We can just plug values in and go v minus u divided by t, instead of having to solve an equation over here. Let's look at some examples. Let's go through some examples of changing the subject. So, we want to make x the subject of this formula. We've got x plus y equals w. So we want to get the x on its own, on one side of this equation, one side of the equals. So if we want to make x the subject, we need to get rid of the y in effect. And so we're going to subtract y from both sides. And this must be important because I've stood up for it. So we're going to subtract y from both sides. Minus y here, minus y here. And then when I've taken away y from both sides, I'm going to get x on this side and equal to w minus y, w minus y. So those were my steps. I took away y from both sides, and I got x equals w minus y. And now you can see x is on its own. It's the subject of that formula. That's a pretty straightforward one because there's only one step. Let's look at some with more than one step now. So again, we're going to try and make x the subject of this formula. Well, what happened to the x was it got multiplied by a v, and then it was added to 4w. So there's a few things happen to the x to get y. We want to undo those things. So we want to kind of get x on its own. Some people say that the way to sort of think about this is to get rid of the thing that's furthest away from x first. I'm not sure how mathematically perfect that is as an explanation, but we are going to get rid of the 4w first because it's further away from the x. So let's just take that away from this side and take that away from this side. And we're going to get just Vx on one side of the equation, and then we're going to have y minus 4w on the other side. Now we've got v multiplied by x. All I have to do is get rid of this multiply by v. And the opposite of multiply by v is to divide by v. Divide by v. And so we end up with x is equal to y minus 4w all divided by v. And that is our formula for calculating x. X is on its own. X is now the subject. Right, let's have another example. This time, x is part of a fraction, which is always a little bit tricky. But actually, in this case, it's going to be okay for rearranging. We want to get the x on its own. At the moment, it is divided by all of y minus 2. Well, if x is divided by all of that, I can undo that. The inverse, the opposite of divide by y minus 2, is to multiply by y minus 2. And if I multiply by y minus 2, and let's just put brackets around that to remind ourselves. When I multiply by all of that, on this side, it's going to cancel out. So I get x equals v multiplied by y minus 2. And you must keep the brackets, because the v is multiplied by the y and the negative 2. Okay? But we've got x on its own. So actually, from what was a quite scary looking thing, it was one step. But you must make those steps efficiently. Right, there's a few examples for you. I now suggest you go off and practice lots of this. But that's rearranging an equation or changing the subject of a formula. Thanks.